Perfect. And share screen. Okay. Okay, should be able to see the entire screen now.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone to my second sharing session on the free Zoom lecture on sports science. So today we're actually going to be doing concurrent training. Okay, and the whole idea of doing this talk is to look at how we're going to minimize the interference effect. So looking at the interference effect, we have a lot of myths that says that if you have to choose a training style, right, you have to choose either between a strength work or a cardio, and that they don't go hand in hand. So on the left, you can see like a marathon runner, okay, and then on the right, you can see a typical bodybuilder. And in the center is basically what I would say a hybrid athlete. And a hybrid athlete is basically you need to have a combination of both strength as well as aerobic capacity to excel well in sports. So think about your rugby, your football, hockey, basically any kind of field sports that marries both kind of training modalities. All right, so we're gonna just look at the myths today, and just a little bit about myself as well. Okay. Okay, so welcome. Yep, my name is Sufyan, for those who are new to me and to my presentation. So my background is in psychology and human performance, and I look more towards the high performance with my athletes. And on top of that, I'm also a associate lecturer with PSB in the module of sports science, as well as a ACPT educator. Okay. All right. Okay, so I have a very special guest with me today, actually. So, for those who are not aware of any, obstacle course racing in Singapore, be it the Spartan races or any other kind of races, I have a special guest who is also, I would say, one of Singapore's best obstacle course racer. Again, it's also part of the entire Spartan Pro Athlete team. Okay, so meaning he take this very seriously. All right, and we have none other than Tahir with us. So welcome, Tahir. Okay, so
Hello.
to give you an idea of just how insane, or I would say a beast this guy is, right? He is able to run a 2.4 in 7 minutes and 47 seconds, which is insane. And he's able to deadlift at 147.5 kilos, which is, I would say, twice your body weight. Is it right, Tahir? Twice your body weight, right?
Yeah, more than twice. Yeah. My body weight is currently at 70, so that's slightly more than twice.
Oh, nice. Okay, so probably
Yeah.
3 times soon, 3 times your body weight.
Yeah.
Okay, but just to show, just to give you an idea of, I would say the practical adaptation that you can get stronger as well as you can have the endurance aspect of training, working hand in hand together to, to give you that edge in terms of the other sports that you play in. So in terms for Tahir, he has been doing this for many years now, and he has seen a lot of improvement in terms of his running speed, his running time, as well as the strength that he has displayed in terms of not just in deadlifts, but in other strength capacity as well, in terms of using the other musculature. Besides deadlifts, talking about squats, and if we can even do single hand pull-ups. So that's how crazily strong Tahir is. Okay, so for the first part, I'm just gonna have a nice chat with Tahir and find out how sort of like concurrent training has helped him progress over the years, and going by his own personal experience, right? Because you always want to hear in terms of personal experience, how can it help you as well. So going from his personal experience, how can this be relatable to even your own lifestyle? Because like it or not, in Singapore's context, most of our athletes are not full-time athletes. Okay, so even for Tahir as well, he's a thespian. So he's he also acts on the side, and he has a full-time job, but he's still able to train to the point where at the level that he is right now. Okay, so yeah, let's just have a nice sort of like an interview with Tahir. So I'm just gonna stop share for a bit. So yeah, Tahir, maybe you can start with how do you this whole OCR athlete came about, and how do you start this journey?
All right. So basically, when I was much younger, I used to do competitive running. I always like when I did nationals, I'll get top 5, top 6 for competitions, but I didn't have the passion for it. It wasn't like an interest. I just was good at it. So over time, I just stopped running because I just didn't enjoy it. Then after my university, I saw an advertisement for Spartan race. It looked very interesting. I decided to just sign up for fun, thinking that, hey, maybe I think I'm naturally good at it. I was so wrong because I did so badly. I failed 8 obstacles, and for every obstacle you fail, you have to do 30 burpees. So I did like a total of 240 burpees for my very first race. And on top of that, I signed up for an elite category, like the highest category, and thinking that, maybe I can get top 10 with my decent level of fitness. Yeah, I got like 43rd position. It was a very humbling experience, but yeah, just I got hooked on from then on. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the elite category. So maybe you can explain to those who are not familiar with the whole Spartan racing or obstacle course racing, right? What are the kind of categories are there in terms of,
So
for example?
there's the elite, which is where you win the bigger bigger kind of like medals in a sense. It's in a rectangle shape. You also get cash prizes. Then there's an age group category where they go by 5 years, I believe, like 35 to 40, 40 to 45. Those are just for like medals and with no cash prize at stake. And then there's an open category where they're more relaxed with the rules. You can help each other through the obstacles. Quite free flow and easy for the open category. Yeah.
So in terms of the race event itself, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, there are different sort of, I would say, demands, right? There are different kilometers that you have to complete. So what are the kind of races are there? Because I know there's a sprint race, for example. From a sprint race, what are the kind of race demands do you need to sort of go through? Just to give an idea of why what you're doing is actually you have to train for it, because it's not something that you can just suddenly go on Sunday and complete it at one go.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, in the obstacle racing world, they always say that Spartan races are 70% of running and 30% strength, which is true to a certain extent. But if you're coming from a base level of fitness, you definitely need a decent amount of strength because it's quite grip intensive. There's a lot of heavy carries. So if you don't have a good level of strength, no matter how fit you are cardiovascularly, you just can't do a lot of the things that are expected race. The race has 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 20 and 42. So it's like your same as your running distances, but with the obstacles stacked together. Yeah, it's interesting to see. The shorter the distance, you will see people are usually a bigger body type, more muscular, more bulky. Then the longer the distance, like the ultra, the 40Ks, their body type is closer to what you see in a long distance runner. So I guess in like the longer you do the distance, the more important your cardio is, and not so much in your strength. And the shorter the distance, yeah, I mean strength is more important because you are hitting obstacles very quickly. Maybe 400 meters, 300 meters, you're hitting the next obstacle.
Understand. That must be insane though. Imagine if you have to run a full marathon and still on top of that, make sure you have the energy,
Yeah,
to
it's
do the strength stuff. That must be crazy.
people get really shocked, especially if they do like a 42 for the first time. They scare themselves. I mean, they shock themselves. They're like, oh my god, I didn't know it was this stuff, and then they just suffer, and then some of them just drop out.
It's definitely have to train about it, and I think that sums up perfectly what concurrent training is all about, right? You need to have that stamina to last the entire distance. At the same time, enough energy to do all the strength work. So in terms of training now, okay, so I'm sure back then your training plan is very different from what you have now. So in terms of your training plan nowadays, right? How does it look like usually?
Right. Okay. So my coach is based in the Philippines, and he prescribes a 4-week cycle. So I usually go like increasing volume for 3 weeks, and then on the fourth week I go through a deload week. Um, so yeah, I do train concurrently in a sense where on double session days I do a run first in the morning or afternoon, and then 6 to 8 hours later I do a strength session. And usually I take minimally 6 hours rest because anything less than that I cannot produce to the full capacity of the training session.
Yeah, perfect. And I think you just gave a little bit of the spoiler of what I'm going to share in terms
Oh,
of the recovery.
okay.
But that's perfect. That tells you that you are training the right way, and I think that's important because I think a lot of people, when they need to train both, the both end spectrum of both endurance work as well as strength, they tend to get a little bit confused. They tend to not know what to do exactly, and if they train wrongly in a sense that then that will definitely impair their progression as well as the kind of adaptation that they want, right? So one important thing that I'm going to be discussing later on as well is actually recovery. So recovery is actually a huge role for all athletes, okay, especially in concurrent training or hybrid athlete as yourself. So in terms of recovery work, how do you, what's your recovery plan, or how much in the day do you really focus on recovery, and what kind of recovery do you really do?
So recently in this past 1 year, the most important things I changed to my lifestyle habits for recovery is actually sleep consistency.
Hmm.
I force myself to wake up every day at the same time because quote me if I'm wrong on this, but because I believe that by fixing that the same sleep cycle of waking up, your body because your body will peak deep into certain low heart rates according to your circadian rhythm. If it's all over the place, you might not recover as optimally. So in a proper sleep cycle, your heart rate should go down like that and it should go up. So I try to keep that consistency throughout the night, and so try to sleep at the same time every day, try to wake up same time every day. It's hard. Sometimes I get distracted. You watch a bit Netflix, and then it just like disturbs back. But yeah, that is really important. I've seen the difference in recovery by sleeping on time and waking up on time. Also, another thing important is my protein intake. I realized I've been like very chronic undereater of protein. Now I try to hit 1 pound, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So that's about 156 grams of protein a day. Anything that is like 80% or less of protein I eat, 156 grams, my recovery takes a significant dip. So yeah, that's very important also.
What way do you feel the difference though? Like, for example, if you were to undereat protein, right? Do you feel like you're sore a little bit longer, or do you feel like you don't have the energy, for example?
More like energy and mood, surprisingly. Yeah, mood was also a factor with the lack of protein. Not so much of like I don't have energy to work out. I don't feel the difference of the energy to work out. It's just like the general mood. The body also feeling a bit like lethargic. Yeah, I guess that's what is the biggest factor for me with the under eating protein.
Wow, perfect. Again, another spoiler that I'm going to share. So I think you, okay, that's perfect actually. That's perfect. I want you to know that, because that tells you that your program is actually one that that really helps you to really progress to the point where you want to be, right? I think that's perfect. Okay, last question because before I let you go. So knowing what you know now, in terms of your training plan, right? What's the one thing that you want to tell the listeners or the viewers, right? That is the biggest change from all the previous training plans that you had before, right? What's the one thing that if you know now, right, that is going to really make a huge difference? You're going to do it back then as well.
So with my previous coach, I realized that every time I go for a run or like for any form of cardio, whether it's like HIIT session in the gym or a run, I've always worked too hard thinking that it's easy enough. So one thing people don't do enough is actually to bring your training intensity really low because there's certain adaptations that happen when you train easier. The thing is, I had this mind muscle I didn't have this connection between effort and my mental in the sense that I think that it's easy, but actually I'm pushing too hard. So I think if anything, any advice I would say that if you think you're going easy, you probably could go easier and that will actually serve you better for your training.
Perfect advice, actually. Right? Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast in terms of progression, I'll say.
Correct. I mean, I've heard this for most of my life. Go slow to go fast, but I didn't realize I still wasn't going slow enough.
I think that's why you need to have some sort of like a good subjective or even objective measures to look at how much you're really giving, because I think that's
Yes, lactate,
perfect.
like lactate testing. Yeah,
Exactly, right? Okay, so yeah, so
yeah.
perfect. That's a perfect way to just advise to those who's listening, not just in the field of obstacle course racing, but in other sports where you need to develop, the different kinds of, I would say, training qualities for programming training. So I think whatever that you shared with us for the last 10 minutes, really hit the nail on the spot, and I think it really sort of set up the tone of my lecture really really well, because we're going to discuss all that later on together with some of the practical I'll say applications that can really bring you to the next level. All right, so thank you, Tahir, for doing this, and yeah, so all the best to your future races. I'm sure we're going to hear more from
Mm,
you, especially if OCR is going to
Thank
be
you so much.
it's going to be a SEA Games sport. So hopefully that works, and
Hopefully,
that
in my
we
lifetime, hopefully.
hopefully, man. I think you will be there
Yeah.
someday. So yeah, and I'm sure you will do Singapore well. All right.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay. Thank you, Tahir.
Okay. Thanks, Sophia.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So that was Tahir, who's sharing with us just some of his personal stories of how he got into OCR and some of his training plans, I would say. And judging and going from there, you can see that, what are the things that he do actually makes a lot of sense. I'm going to share this later on in terms of my lecture. What's a good practical way to develop both qualities of just basically strength work as well as endurance work. Okay, and what works and what doesn't in that sense. Okay, so we're just going to move on. Okay, so where does this idea come from in the first place? I think one of the earliest, even from my experience, right, one of the earliest things that I hear from the guys in the gym is that cardio kills your gains, right? If you want to build muscle, you gotta really make sure that you minimize cardio, or you bring cardio to at least a minimal level, right? Because you talk to any I would say old school bodybuilder kind of people, they will say that, okay, too much cardio, and you are not able to see the hypertrophy or the strength gains, because the adaptation to cardio will actually blunt all that. And in a sense, that is actually not wrong. Okay, so from a physiology standpoint, we would say that it does hold true to a certain extent, because if you look at this, I'm not going to go too in depth with the molecular signaling of our body. Okay, but just know that for endurance training as well as resistance training, there are two different pathways in that sense. Okay, for endurance training, it will go through what we call the AMPK pathway. Okay, whereas in the resistance training, we will go through to what is called the mTOR pathway. So the mTOR pathway is where it starts the whole muscle protein synthesis signaling to the ribosome proteins. Okay, and the whole idea of what interference effect is just that, if you have too much AMPK signaling, it will actually downplay mTOR, okay, or it inhibits mTOR. Okay, so that's what the definition of interference effect is all about. Okay, so it's presumed that endurance exercise interferes with resistance training via residual fatigue and substrate depletion, and therefore blunt any muscular development. All right, so this is led by Leverett and Abernethy in 1999. Okay, and if you think about it, why do we want to minimize the interference effect? Okay, so if you look at a rugby player, for example, okay, or we just talked to Tahir just now, who does obstacle course racing, right, your Spartan races, and he shared about how there are even, I would say, half marathons or full marathon length. On top of that, you still have to do some obstacles which requires strength. So the more that you minimize the interference effect, the more you can develop the different kind of qualities. Okay, so some sports require that you develop multiple properties to excel. So for example, you need to develop explosive lower body, upper body power, linear lateral speed, upper body, lower body strength, anaerobic capacity, aerobic capacity. Okay, so for example, in rugby, you have to develop all of these to be sort of like an elite rugby player, right? But then again, if the interference effect comes in, right? For example, if I were to focus on aerobic capacity, it might blunt my, for example, upper body and lower body strength. So how do we then really minimize this? Okay, so this is the framework of what today's lecture is going to be all about. All right. So if you look at the first incidence of the interference effect, actually comes about by Hickson in 1980. Okay, so Hickson was among the first, I would say maybe the first, I might be wrong about this, but he was the first to actually, or should I say among the first, to actually look at this interference effect. Okay, so what he did for the group is that there are three groups. Okay, one does only strength work. Okay, one does only endurance work, while the last one does concurrent training, so both strength and endurance. Okay, and what he realized is, so the result from that is that after 7 weeks, the strength for the group that does concurrent training, okay, so both strength and endurance, actually starts to see a decrease. Okay, so if you look at the graph, this is the graph. Okay, so you can see that actually, from 7 weeks onwards, right? So that's on the left side. Yeah, so S plus E, that's strength plus endurance. So this is the concurrent group. So you can see that from the 7th week onwards, you can see that the strength starts to decrease as compared to just the group that does only strength work itself. Okay, but I would say the devil is always in the details. All right, so what I mean is, if you look at the sort of the modalities that they use, right? Or the study program that they do. Okay, so the strength group, they basically do 5 times 5 for 5 days a week at 80% of 1 RM, progressing to 85% eventually. So they do mostly leg exercises. So you're talking about your squats, your leg press, leg extension, leg curls. So they do this for 5 days. Okay, so I think they do it every alternating days. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they do the bigger muscle groups. On the Tuesday and Thursday, they will do a smaller muscle group, okay, like your calves or isolation work. All right. So the endurance group, they do 6 days per week, 3 days on the ergometer, VO2 max, close to their VO2 max, 3 days running as fast as you can, starting off at 30 minutes and obviously progressing to 40 minutes. And okay, so even for the ergometer group, also they did 30 minutes worth of work. Okay, and then lastly, the strength plus endurance group, basically it's just a combination of the strength and endurance work. All right, so they do the same protocol for the strength group. They rest 2 hours. Okay, then they continue the endurance work. Okay, so they do this for 5 of the days, obviously a concurrent work, right? Because there's only 5 days of work for the strength group. Okay, for the endurance, there's obviously an extra day. Okay, so technically, you can see that there's a lot of volume in this. So I want you to put on your thinking cap. Right? Is it really cardio that kills the game? And why I say this is to put it in a practical standpoint. How many of us here actually will be able to train at 80 to 85% of your 1RM for 5 days a week for strength? Very little, I would say, right? And even for the endurance group, okay, run in the bike, going close to your VO2 max, or running as fast as you can, okay, meaning it's still high intensity work. How many of us actually do that for 6 days a week? Maybe if you do like F45 or whatever, right? But I can see that, from a practical standpoint, not many of us will actually be able to do such high volume work within a week itself. Okay, so is it really cardio that kills the game, or is it really the interference effect where the AMPK blunts your mTOR? Okay, so okay, think about this because we're going to discuss this later on. So put it on the side for now. Okay, but then as years go by, as people start to look at the whole idea of concurrent training a little bit deeper, they realize something. Okay, so Fai et al., Fai and his colleagues in 2014 did a meta-analysis of all the concurrent studies out there. I'm not sure how many studies did they have a meta-analysis of, and what they find out is actually this. So what they find out is actually different from what Hickson found out in 1980, and that is, if you look at one of the line in this paragraph here for the conclusion. So I took this from the conclusion of their paper, and what it says is that the majority of current molecular data suggests that endurance exercise does not compromise early anabolic response. Okay, meaning it does not blunt your mTOR adaptation, does not blunt whatever hypertrophy or strength work that you do. Okay, and this is backed again by many other studies out there. Okay, if you want me to pass you the research papers, I'm more than happy to share. All right, because if I were to go through every research paper, I would not have enough time. Okay, but plenty of studies out there have shown that you can have both positive adaptation to endurance and muscular development. Okay, so it doesn't blunt each other. So some of them, for example, Wong et al., Sedano, Garcia, they do this with marathon runners. Okay, and they realize that they do improve 1RM strength as well as their running time. Okay, and there's many more other studies that actually show this. Okay, so if it's not mTOR inhibition, what else can cause the interference effect? Okay, so if you look at the mTOR and the AMPK, you might think of it like, okay, if you do endurance work, aerobic endurance work, you're definitely not going to get gains. Okay, but if the studies have shown that that's not the case, right? Then why is that? Why is that people still have the interference effect? Okay, so potential mechanisms that can happen. Okay, one, there could be negative energy balance or depleted muscle glycogen. Okay, I'm going to share all of this in depth a little bit after this. Yeah. So one, there could be a negative energy balance or depleted muscle glycogen. Two, overtraining. Okay. And three, motor recruitment. Okay, so if you realize, when I share all these potential mechanisms, it has nothing to do so much with the molecular signaling. Doesn't have to do so much with whether it's mTOR or ENPK. If you look at this, right, if you were to take like a very broad picture and take a snapshot of all these potential mechanisms, you realize that it has more to do with how you plan your training program. Okay, so if you plan it right, what I'm trying to say is, if you plan it right, you can actually get both adaptation well enough. Okay, both endurance training as well as the strength work. Okay, the adaptation to your strength work. Okay, I'm also gonna go a little bit in depth to each of the potential mechanism. Okay, so the first one I'm gonna talk about is the negative energy balance, as well as depleted muscle glycogen. All right. So some studies have shown that in low muscle glycogen state, mTOR activation is reduced. Okay, and that probably could come from long duration aerobic exercises. So what you're looking at is maybe a prolonged uh, aerobic work that could last maybe 1.5 hours, 2 hours, so almost like a marathon, okay, or half marathon, I would say. Okay, and the lower the muscle glycogen state is, the more inhibited your mTOR activation is going to be. Okay, so that's why training fasted or training in a fatigue state is not the best if you're going to be doing hypertrophy work or strength training. Okay, so you know how some people do fasted training for their cardio, right? Okay, that is still possible if the running intensity is low enough, right? But from a hypertrophy standpoint, from a molecular mTOR standpoint, training fasted actually doesn't really engage the mTOR pathway well enough, right? So it's not, I wouldn't recommend training fasted for at least strength training, for any kind of resistance training. Okay, and remember, I know this is not a nutrition talk, but remember that to optimize hypertrophy, the body has to be in a caloric surplus. Okay, I'm not a nutritionist. Okay, but do know that from a principle of hypertrophy standpoint, the best is always to be in a caloric surplus. Of course, there are still other conditions that you can do so without caloric surplus, but the best way to optimize hypertrophy will always be caloric surplus. Okay, and if you were to be in negative energy balance, meaning in a calorie deficit, one you're definitely not going to see any kind of ideal hypertrophy. Okay, and in terms of mTOR, for mTOR Pacific pathway, then obviously it's going to be even lesser in that sense. Okay, so to address this, rest. Okay, rest has shown that if you separate your endurance work, okay, if you separate your aerobic work with your strength training work, you can actually see a positive results. Okay, so how long should you rest? Okay, obviously the most ideal situation is 24 hours. Okay, this is by Sill and his colleagues in 1990. So they did this study. All right. So what they realized is that if you separate it by 24 hours, meaning a day, you don't have to worry about the interference effect. Meaning if you do, for example, long interval steady state on Monday, okay, if you do aerobic conditioning on Monday, Tuesday is going to be your strength work, hypertrophy work, then that is fine. Okay, the interference effect is going to be quite low in that sense. Okay, now 24 hours sometimes might not be possible for some athletes out there. So some athletes, they might need double sessions, right? A morning session and afternoon and evening session. So what happens then? Right. So to minimize interference effect, 6 to 8 hours rest is sufficient. Okay, so 6 to 8 hours. This is by Sporer and Wenger and Wong. Okay, so they look at, if I'm not wrong, kayak athlete for Sporer. Can't remember Dong Wong do on which kind of athlete. Okay, but they realized that if you were to separate it by 6 to 8 hours, again you're gonna minimize the interference effect. Okay, now what you do for that 6 to 8 hours gap is also important. Yeah. So why is it important? Because if you were to just do nothing for the 6 to 8 hours, right, then it could still impair, or should I say, not allow you to be in a condition where you're able to train well enough. Okay, so what I mean is that in that 6 to 8 hours, how you recover is important. So things like making sure that you eat enough protein or carbs. Okay, so having a good, well balanced meal, as a fuel. Okay, that's important. If you can take a nap, if you can take a rest, do something relaxing for that 6 to 8 hours. Okay, that helps as well. Okay, so remember, yeah, 6 to 8 hours seems to be the sweet spot if you want to separate your aerobic work with your strength work. Okay, the second one, overtraining. Okay, so overtraining, and this is, I would say, the most common issue or the most common problem that a lot of people face. And this is why I think a lot of people actually see the interference effect. Again, it's mostly due from overtraining. So Davis and colleagues in 2008 looks at the interference effects, and they realized that if you train to your, you know, maximal oxygen uptake, meaning high intensity work, right, your heat and that kind of stuff, again, it's gonna increase the interference effect. Okay, worse if you don't pair it with good recovery. Okay, and this is again something that has been shown over and over again with other studies. So Garcia and Izukedo, okay, they look at high volume of training. So high volume of training to failure again induces the interference effect, meaning the strength as well as the hypertrophy adaptation that they were hoping to see doesn't really occur. Okay, and remember Hickson, okay, Hickson, the study that we talked about in 1980. All right, so basically you're training 5 days a week for strength, 6 days a week for cardio, and you realize that after a while, it just dies down. So that's chronic overtraining. Okay, that tells you that it's chronic overtraining. Chronic overtraining meaning that you might not see the interference effect in the first 2 weeks. Okay, you might see it later on. Okay, in the third, fourth, or fifth, sixth week, for example. Okay, so overtraining is actually one of the bigger contributor to interference effect there is. So how do you want to address this then? Okay, one, it's you want to deload. Okay, so you're gonna look at deloading, meaning you cut back down on the volume. Okay, so in most common deload protocol, it's you train for the first 3 weeks, okay, and then you deload on the fourth week, and then you go back up again on the fifth, and then you deload again on the eighth week. So every 4 weeks, the fourth week, there's always a deload program, okay. And second thing you want to do is you want to manage the volume and intensity well. So sometimes like I said, for some athletes who train double, right, who have double sessions on a day, in a day, how you pair the double sessions is important as well. Okay, because you don't want to wait until the fourth week to have a deload. All right, so even on a week-to-week basis, you want to try and see how can you manage the volume and intensity as much as you can. All right, especially again for those athletes who has to train twice a day, because I think that's really, really important. Okay, all right, last one, motor recruitment mechanism. All right, so what they realized, okay, so another train of thought is that for a few of the researchers out there, they look at, for example, power. Okay, so besides looking at muscle activation, right, or hypertrophy or strength, they look at motor unit recruitment. In this sense, they are looking at explosive work, okay, or the rate of force development. And what they realized, and it's not just one researcher, so I think there's many more research. I'm just quoting one of them. So Dudley and Jamil in 1985 points out that if you do endurance training, it doesn't affect max strength, okay, meaning your 1RM doesn't really go down, but what it affects, it actually affects the explosive work, okay, or the rate of force development. And again, this has been shown in many other studies out there as well, is that if you were to do long endurance training program, it can actually affect on the body's ability to produce force. Okay, so for example, if you're going to do let's say a half marathon in the morning, okay, so even if you rest 6 hours, they realize that the ability to produce a lot of force in the afternoon session, right, or in the evening session, it actually goes down. Okay, so things like your power clean, your clean, your jerk, your snatch, that kind of stuff, right? The ability to actually produce force to do all those exercises actually goes down if you were to do a long, sort of like a long endurance work in the beginning of the day. Okay, so to address this again, it's similar to what the previous slide talks about. Okay, how you manage volume and intensity, and that can be done through having a proper periodization. So I know a lot of people out there, they have ideas on, what's an effective periodization program. Okay, to be honest, if you ask me, periodization works doesn't matter what kind of periodization that you are going through. It works if you learn how to manage your volume and intensity well. Okay, so well thought out periodization can actually work well for the athlete who needs to have different qualities in their physical capabilities, right? So you need to have proper periodization in that sense. So things that we're looking at, for example, you're looking at conjugate, okay, or even block training or vertical periodization. So these are just some of the periodization techniques that you can use to look at the different qualities, okay, to look at the different qualities of the I'll say the training program, okay. All right, so in terms of summary and practical application, okay, coming to the end of our lecture, so just a quick one. All right, so whenever possible, try to have at least 24 hours of rest, okay. If you can, that's the best case scenario. If not, a 6 to 8 hours gap is good enough. All right, so for example, if you were to train at 9 a.m. for your cardio, it takes about an hour. Then the next session should be at around 7 or 8, for example. Okay, so in between, you want to make sure that you're resting well enough. Okay, so try not to do anything that impairs your recovery. So even things like other kind of stresses, like work stress, family stress, you want to try and see how you minimize it. Okay, obviously good nutritional plan works well for you as well. Okay, so things like having enough adequate protein, having enough carbs, okay, that could help fuel your subsequent sessions. Okay, second, marry your training qualities well. Okay, so based on some of the research out there, some things work together well hand in hand. Okay, so what I mean is, for example, max strength work. Okay, you're looking at your 5 RM or 3 RM. Okay, so if you're going to be doing this, what they realize is that it pairs well if you're going to be doing with speed or agility work. Okay, something that's a little bit more faster pace, I would say. Okay, this could probably be because of the potentiation effect. Okay, so for example, on a morning session, you can do like a 3 to 5 RM heavy work. All right, and then in the afternoon or evening session, you do sprint work. Okay, sprint agility stuff. Okay, that seems to work hand in hand quite well. All right, so next one is high level of aerobic conditioning. Okay, so high level of aerobic conditioning goes well hand in hand with hypertrophy work. Okay, so try not to do it with max strength. Okay, because they realize that that actually impairs the ability to produce max strength. Probably from a motor recruitment perspective. Okay, so if you're going to be doing high level of aerobic conditioning, meaning either long hit or long distance running in the morning, okay, what you can do is in the next session, right, in the afternoon or evening session, focus more on the hypertrophy stuff. Okay, best if you could go away from the different body parts. So meaning if you're going to be doing running, in the morning, okay, for the hypertrophy work in the afternoon or evening, you can focus more on upper body, for example. Okay, so that could help you recover well enough, so that it doesn't impair the quality of your training, and you can still have the right kind of adaptation in that sense. Okay. Okay, so this is just a sample. Again, like I said, you don't have to follow this, as long as you have a proper sort of like a framework in hand. Okay, so will be an example of how a 6-day training program for me, it will look like. Okay, so for example, on a Monday morning session, you will do a long interval steady state. Okay, you're looking at maybe about 70 to 80% of your max heart rate. Okay, that kind of intensity. And in the PM session, okay, meaning 6 to 8 hours later, if I want to do a hypertrophy program, I can do a whole body hypertrophy program. Okay, so this is not a hypertrophy lecture. So obviously, you still have to manage volume and intensity well for the hypertrophy work. Okay, well enough such that you have enough adaptations. But what I'm trying to say is this is how you're going to pair it. Okay, how you're going to pair an endurance exercise together with strength work. Okay, so you can do an LISS and whole body hypertrophy. Okay, on the Tuesday morning, you can do HIIT, okay, which is slightly higher intense. So speed work, all right, small sided games, for example. Okay, and then after the afternoon session, you can do your max strength work. Okay, 3 RM, 5 RM, whatever. Okay, and then Wednesday, okay, because HIIT can be quite draining, I'll take a rest. I'll still continue my whole body hypertrophy program later on in the day. Okay, and it goes on. Okay, so Thursday I would then do LISS. I'll let my body recover from the strength work. Friday I'll go back to HIIT. Okay, because that's at least about 2 days of rest from my previous HIIT. Okay, and then I go back to max strength after that. And then Saturday I rest on my cardio and I focus on whole body hypertrophy once again to make sure that I hit the right amount of volume. Okay, so you can see that it is still possible to get both adaptation as long as you know how to plan the intensity well. Okay, if you can plan the intensity well enough, then interference effect is very minimal. Okay, is very low in that sense. Okay, so this is on a weekly program. Okay, so another example I can show is block periodization. Okay, so block prioritization is you're focusing on one quality at a time, for example. So for example, in week one, okay, I focus on building my aerobic pace, okay, building my aerobic capacity. So looking at LISS, looking at running 70 to 80% of your max heart rate again, and then slowly increasing volume within that week, for example. Okay, and then week two, for the entire week, I just focus purely on hypertrophy work. Okay, I take a rest from LISS, I focus on hypertrophy stuff instead. And week three, I focus more on power or heat work. Okay. Week four, I rest or I deload, I should say. I wouldn't put rest. I would still want to try to do something, so I deload it. Maybe I can do a bit of still a bit of hypertrophy work at a lower volume. Okay, maybe same intensity but at a lower volume, for example. Okay, and then week five, I go back to uh, building my aerobic capacity. So LISS stuff again. Really, week six, I can do max strength and so on. Okay, so there's no hard and fast rule of what you should be doing. Okay, it's again depending on the sports itself, depending on the individual itself, on what you need to focus on. Okay, so in terms of block prioritization, you always want to try and focus on the things that they are weak at first. Okay, so for example, if my athlete has poor aerobic conditioning, okay, then I want to focus on aerobic conditioning first, build a good baseline. Okay, then I can focus on to the next quality maybe for the next week. All right, so this is just an example of how you want to play around with different kind of programming. Okay, so there's no hard and fast rules for this. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's it. So it's a very short share. Looking at just the whole idea of concurrent training. Okay. So if you want to find out more, I'm happy to share. I think a bit of error on that. It's not hit yet. So I'm happy to share all the things concurrent training with you. In terms of even writing programs or even the research papers out there, because there's a lot of research papers that looks at concurrent training already. So I'm happy to share with all that. And then these are the ways that you can actually reach out to me. So this is my email, and you can find me on Facebook as well. Just type in my name. And if you want to find me on Instagram, you can just go to Sufyan Elron. Okay. So thank you, everyone. This is of course going to be the link I'll share with as you can share the link as to as many people as you want. For those who want to find out more about concurrent training. Okay, so I think this is just a good way to start off with. Okay, it's not in depth, but it's just a good start. Okay, to know that you can develop different qualities at the same time if you are looking to build the multi-level athlete, I would say. All right, or you're going to build different qualities of the entire training spectrum. All right, so thank you for spending your time with me and for listening to this lecture. And I'll see you for my next one. All right, goodbye.